Well, hello, Catholic Education Tasmania leaders and educators. Simon Breaksby here, and I'm thrilled to be tuning in to your All System Day as you come together here in Term 4 to reflect on the work you've collectively done together during Term 3, and then think about what's the work to focus on this term and how do we set ourselves up to continue and indeed to build the momentum in this work for Teach First into 2026. Now, I gotta say, I'm such a huge fan of the work that you're collectively doing. I know how busy school life is and how easy it is to focus purely on getting through the week, getting through the term, doing the core work, and responding to the urgent. But in the Teach First initiative, we're being given license, both from the system and we're giving it to each other, to not just do our jobs, but to carve out some time to get better at how we do our work. Of course, teaching is an incredible craft. It's one of those crafts that you can work on for a 30-plus-year career and still have further things to learn, to nuance, and to try out. And therefore, as we kind of think about this work, one of the things to do right at the outset is just to remember again that we get to do this rather than we have to. And you might say, well, that's easy for you to say, Simon. You don't work here. It feels like we kind of have to do it. But what I mean by that is there's a sense that this is our opportunity to continue in professional growth wherever we're up to in our career. It's not so much a compliance, mostly because you can never really, through compliance, make someone else develop expertise. I mean, I suppose you can nudge them to have to turn up to a certain meeting and go through a certain process. But just like we can't learn on behalf of our students, no one can develop teaching expertise on your behalf. So this is our opportunity as educators coming together in your practice groups, working together as a system to keep getting better. Like, let me ask you, how good are you now as an educator compared to how good you can be? And if there's any gap where you think, you know what, I'm pretty good, but I'm not saying as I'm as good as I could be, then the Teach First initiative and the collective work we're doing in sprints allows us to keep edging towards collectively, towards being the best teachers that we can be. And of course, it's not just about our own professional growth and the satisfaction that comes from that, the growing efficiency that comes from having more evidence-informed practices as part of our repertoire, because as our teaching becomes more effective, actually we save ourselves time. But also the real driver there is that we want to continue to ask ourselves, how can we have an even greater level of impact for a larger number of our students? So within this Teach First initiative, we've got an opportunity to keep growing in our craft, to have a model of professional growth, to keep enhancing our impact on students. And we're not left to do that ourselves, somehow trying to carve out enough time and somehow in the busyness of it all to motivate ourselves to somehow not just do our teaching, but get better at our teaching. No, we've got a really clear approach here. You've got a clear what, the things to focus on, built on the evidence base that Rosenshine pulled together and now codified in easy to use materials by your system. And we're not trying to make huge changes. We're not trying to transform our pedagogical craft. No, rather, in Term 3 2025, you worked on the specific area of sequencing. And whatever the specific practices you focused on around sequencing the learning, and by the way, some of our schools were even focusing on elements of engagement norms and routines, which is exactly where they're up to in their development process. Whatever that was a really foundational sprint to run to help us to think about how we could reduce unnecessary cognitive load, how we could break things down for learners, how we could really just strengthen that front part of often our teaching sequence. Into Term 1 next year, then we're looking at modeling, Term 2 into questioning, Term 3 into feedback. And I know it's crazy, but all the way thinking into 2027, already thinking about things like daily and weekly review and guided and independent practice. And the reason why I'm sort of mapping up this sequence is one of the things that Teach First invites us to do is to go on an incremental, sustainable improvement journey where we're adding one or two key practices into our craft. And for some, we've already got that practice, don't get me wrong, but we're trying to elevate the quality and the consistency of our use of it. And if we can trust the process, that means that as a system collectively, over the next 2 years, we can add one piece to our repertoire. We can enhance one element piece by piece. And just by working on that bit, trying to embed it and incorporate it into our ongoing repertoire, into those instructional habits that we use on a regular basis, each of us individually are going to feel that real sense of leveling up as our sequencing connects into our modeling, connects into our questioning, into our feedback, into our review, and into our guided practice. We may well look back in about 2 years individually and collectively and think, actually, there's a whole range of areas in my classroom practice now that someone outside would observe and say, that is dramatically different to the way you used to teach in 2024. Or you've seen a real step change in the impact you're having across your students or with a particular subset of students who are benefiting most from this work you've been doing. And so the vision is intentional, systematic practice. Not because we're not good enough, as Dylan William would say, but because each of us has the ability to keep getting better. Not trying to do that individually carving out time and motivating ourselves and choosing what to work on. None of us really have the bandwidth to do that consistently, but doing it collectively in our practice groups, supported by our sprint coaches and our ILTP educators, working with those colleagues we're starting to build some real connections with, and thinking about over time how we can level that up and move forward. So I'm really excited you're getting together today to think again about your really powerful model of professional growth as captured in the Teach First initiative and your sprint model of prepare, act, share. Each one of these sprints should feel focused, intentional, and manageable. Something that we can carve out the time and energy to do in the terms that are allocated for it. But don't underestimate the cumulative compounding benefit of small evidence-informed improvement that happens in our craft that adds up over time. We're still very early days in this process. And one of the most important things to be talking about today are the lessons learned of what things have worked and not worked as well, and how you can continue to get better at getting better.